Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about how you can ask better questions so that you can receive better psychic hits. So this is like a common thing that I think most people run into when they are trying to receive psychic information. And they're not asking questions in the best way that they could be asking, and therefore they're getting answers that don't make sense, or they're getting answers that are inaccurate, or they're just feeling like they're getting no answers at all. And so I'm kind of going to go over 4 of the biggest areas where people make mistakes and how you can sort of get around this. So if you're new here, please subscribe. I try to make new videos every week about your psychic ability, how you can connect with it, and how you can really strengthen it more. All right, so let's jump into these 4 common problem areas. Now I want to have like an example question because I find that when I do that, it just makes a lot more sense when I'm explaining things. So let's pretend that you had a fight with a family member. Let's just say like your uncle. You're pissed off at him. You're so angry. He wronged you and you've just like had it and you're done and you want to talk to your guides and get some advice on the situation. And then what happens is you start pulling some cards, or you go to a psychic and they don't ask the questions right, or you don't ask the questions right. And then the information that comes through just doesn't make sense, or it's like telling you exactly what you want to hear, but you're like, that's probably not the right answer. It's probably just what I want to hear. And then you're connecting wrong and you're emotional about it and just things don't work out. Now, not saying that this happens like with every question, but this is just like, I'm trying to give you like the worst case scenario so we can like pick it apart. And my first tip is really about making sure that we're asking questions from a place of like what, why, and how. When you get into other forms of asking questions like yes or no questions or when questions, those kind of are different and open up a whole nother box, and I'll get into that in a second. But we want to make sure that our questions are open-ended. There's room for our guides to elaborate. So it needs to be a question that is not just going to yield one answer, like a date or a time or just a simple yes or a simple no. So if you're asking, is my uncle a jerk? That's not going to be a good question because it's not open-ended. But if you started with, why is my uncle a jerk? That would be a little bit different. So when we talk about when questions, when will I get a house? When will my uncle give me the money he owes me or something? When will I get pregnant? The thing about that is that the future can always change. And this is something I describe like over and over again in my live nights. And so you can ask a psychic about the future and what is their timeline that they see on things. And some psychics are really good about picking up timelines. Maybe others, it's not like their forte. But when questions, again, it's about the future can change. So I could be reading that this uncle is going to give you this money on October or 1st or something like that. Let's just pretend. And then what happens is maybe your uncle in 2 days, like I'm reading that situation as it was then. But then what if your uncle in 2 days, he was supposed to receive that money so that he could pay you in October, but he fell down a flight of stairs or something. This is kind of turning dark. But let's pretend he fell down a flight of stairs. That changes his future. Maybe he couldn't go to that job and collect that check. Like, does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. The future can always change. And so even though I might have been reading it and it might have been right in that moment, something could have happened the next day, the next couple of days, that completely invalidates my reading. So whenever people ask me when questions, I always try to turn it around and ask, instead of when, can we turn it into a what or a why or a how? And I also try to focus it on less passive advice, and this is just like my personal thing. I don't like to ask questions of like, will it happen or won't it happen? I want to have people feel empowered to make it happen. So if somebody asks me like, when will I get into a relationship with this person? Instead I ask, how can you get into a relationship with this person? Because then we're talking about action items that you can do to further manifest this relationship or this job, instead of me just being like, oh, nope, you're not going to have it. And then the person feels like totally helpless and that they have no control. So with when questions, sometimes I'll tune into those and give people my thoughts around the win, but I always like cover it up with like a bunch of like, hey, know that I could be wrong, know that the future can change. Instead of focusing on when, focus on how can you manifest this? How can you make it better? So next is those yes or no questions, those tricky yes or no questions. They are my least favorite. And by the way, should I or shouldn't I are also yes or no questions, because you're basically asking, should I do it or should I not do it? Yes or no? And the reason why I don't like yes or no questions is they only leave two answers, yes or no. And what if, you know, you asked a yes or no question, is my uncle going to give me my money back? And what if the answer was a no, but, you know, like, no, he's not going to give you your money back, but he's going to give you a job and you're going to make a lot of money that way or something like that. Who knows? And so I feel like when you narrow the box of what information can come through, it really just doesn't allow things to come through. It doesn't allow more psychic input to happen. So that's why we want to keep it open-ended, not yes or no questions. Now, there's obviously people who are going to ask yes or no questions, and you can answer them. I just always give this whole spiel to them. And it ends up working out for me because I end up attracting the people who are not asking the yes or no questions, because they understand kind of how this works and they understand that they can't like manic manifest and stuff like that. But if you have to answer yes or no questions, I'm going to give you some tips on how to do that. So the biggest thing I use for yes or no questions is polarities. So these are symbols that you set ahead of time with your guides to determine what yes is and what no is. And so one of the things that my coach taught me was to use a flower. And when like the flower blooms, it's a yes. When the flower wilts, it's a no. You can use anything. You can use any two opposites. You can use night and day. Honestly, it doesn't even have to be opposites, but you want to have a symbol in your mind for yes and a symbol in your mind for no. And you can either set these ahead of time and tell your guides like, hey guides, this is what I'm using. I'm using this flower. Affect this image in my mind or something when you're picking up the information using your clairs. Or what you can do is you can ask your guides to give you symbols. So you can say, hey guides, can you show me what yes means? Can you show me what no means? Very similar to pendulum work. But then they could show you what yes or no means. And then maybe it's not even like opposites. Maybe they're just like, when it's a yes, you'll see an apple. When it's a no, you'll see a truck or something like that. So you can decide. You can either decide ahead of time what it means or what it doesn't mean. I use this with deceased people, and I say, okay, there's a symbol for someone who's deceased. There's a symbol for someone who's still living. So if somebody has like a family member that they aren't sure is still around, or a cat or something. But polarities are awesome tools in order to help you try to determine yes or no questions. So you just have to imagine that object in your mind neutrally and then ask the question and see how that object changes. And you might not actually see it. I say these things because I'm clairvoyant. That's like my strongest clair. But you might hear it. You might hear, you know, your guides say, oh, the flower is wilting. Oh, the flower is blooming, or something like that. And honestly, if you have a different clair strength, maybe adjust it to that clair. So maybe you hear ringing when it's a yes, or I wouldn't go that vague. Maybe, you know, if you hear birds, then it's a yes. If you hear a whale, I don't know, it's a no. Same with like clairsentience. You could even set with them like, when I feel hot, maybe it's a yes. When I feel cold, it's a no. That there's a little bit of gray area there, because sometimes you might be feeling hot because it's literally just hot, and you want to make sure you're not actually interpreting that as a psychic hit. But honestly, the claircognizance is probably the best clair to use for yes and no. And claircognizance is just expecting it to come as a fast download. So any claircognizant exercises that you can do is definitely something that you want to use to strengthen answering yes or no questions. So definitely like my videos on like the Zener cards, or just using playing cards. Those are all claircognizant exercises. Also like speed readings is a claircognizant exercise. So if you really are just like resonating with yes or no questions, or you're getting a lot of them for whatever reason, focus on claircognizant exercises. Now, if you're answering yes or no questions, I highly recommend you actually use your psychic abilities to answer those. Now, what I see a lot of people doing is going to tools to answer the yes or no's. They are pulling out pendulums. Those magnetic pendulums, I'm sorry, I'm going to say it now, I think they're the worst. It's like the littlest amount of effort as possible is going into those magnetic ones. And it's just like, that's totally dependent on like how your hand drops, and there's no bit of psychic information in there that I can understand how that would work. But just understand that if you if you use a pendulum, you can obviously learn how to do it and get a yes or no that way. You can also use tarot cards, and you can set the intention ahead of time. If I pull it reversed, it's a no. If I pull it upright, it's a yes. Or maybe even the numbers, like if the number is odd or the number is even, it means yes or no. But just again, know that with the tools, they become a crutch, and they can easily be wrong. And so that's why I'm always, advocating on my channel to always go to your psychic ability first. I really feel like using those tools is a last minute like resort cop out in a way. I think you're going to pick up much clearer information using your psychic ability. Obviously, that's not going to be the case for everybody, especially if you're not tuned into your psychic ability. I understand wanting to use those tools. But if you're learning, you might as well learn it the right way. So going back to Uncle's situation, is Uncle going to give me my money back? Yes or no? If you have to answer it that way. And there are some questions where like you really just can't ask it in another way at all. Again, I would recommend stepping back and saying something to the effect of like, how can I manifest the money coming back from my uncle or something like that. I want to know who this uncle guy is that steals all your money. I'm like slightly wondering if there's somebody out there who's going to be like, oh, this is the exact situation that's going on in my life. It's like actually me doing a reading. That would be hilarious. And if I look down a lot in my videos, it's because I'm reading my notes, and I try really hard to not look down, but my videos are a lot better when I plan out what I'm going to say ahead of time. So the third biggest mistake that happens when you're asking questions is when you're asking for the wrong reasons. This is kind of like your motivation behind it. If you are asking because you want to spite your uncle, for example, if you're asking a question like, how can I get back at my uncle? And you're pulling tarot cards because you're pissed. You might not get the right answer, or you might hear only what you want to hear, but you have that gut feeling that it's like, oh, this isn't right because I know I'm pissed. So when you're asking a question, you always want to make sure it's coming from a good place and you're asking for the right reasons. You're not asking to cause anyone else harm, whether that's like emotionally, physically. I feel like this is like pretty like basic, but I do find that if you are doing things for the wrong reasons, and if you're like prying into somebody else's life, I find that our guides purposely give us incorrect information. They want us to stop using our intuition in that way, and so they will make our intuition less reliable. And I really believe that happens. And maybe you're not doing this even to like pry into somebody else's life, but there's something about being super emotional that doesn't help with questions. You really need to come into it with a neutral mindset. If you are so mad or super upset, sometimes you are not in the best place to receive information. And this is why, like, I always have a rule. If you lose somebody, you have to at least wait a week to see me, because I want you to get over the crazy intense emotions that you kind of need to get through. Like if you're going through a breakup, if you just lost a pet, I'm always like, I know it's hard, but I want you to wait like a day or a week or something like that. And it's because I want people to not waste their money on me and only listen to what they want to hear. If you're so emotional and so desperate, sometimes you'll have selective hearing and you'll only hear the pieces that you want to hear, and then you'll discard everything else. So you really want to be in a good place, whether you're seeing a psychic or you're giving like a reading to someone. You want them to be in a place where they're actually going to listen. And I think the bigger thing here is that if you're constantly seeking intuitive advice and you're not listening to it, you're not acting on it, you're telling your guides, you're telling your psychic ability that in a way you don't trust it, that you don't validate it, that you don't, that you don't value the information. And when you keep telling your psychic ability that, like, I'm not going to take any of the advice, not saying that you have to take all the advice, but, just listening and acknowledging and saying thank you is one thing versus somebody who constantly goes and sees psychics and just throws away everything they say until they're ready to hear what they want to hear. So I think when you go in with a bad motivation, you either get information that's not accurate, or you don't get information at all, or you might have had the information come through, but you don't even trust it because you're not even paying attention. So it's so important that you do it for the right reasons and you have a good motivation behind the questions. So going back to this uncle thing, instead of being like, why is my uncle such a jerk? And you're pissed off. Maybe you take a minute, you calm down, you come back to it, and you say, why did this situation happen? What was I doing to attract this? What can I do to make this situation better? So all of those are much better questions that are sort of getting at the same thing, but because you set your emotions aside, you're able to think about how to ask that question a little bit better. The last mistake that often happens is judging or expecting a certain answer to come through before it comes through. This is sort of similar to like when you want to hear something specific. If you are saying to your guides like, where should I move? And you really, really want to move to Florida for some reason. And you are so set on that's literally all you're allowing to come through. You know, what if your guides wanted to say, oh, your best place to move is California or something like that? The issue is if you are judging the answer before it comes through, then you are sort of limiting it. It's like you're narrowing what can come through. I hope this makes sense. So you want to stay like free of judgment. And that also comes like once you receive the information, it's not using your analytical mind to interpret that information. So you might get a bit of information, like you might see your uncle really sad. And this is like the whole going deeper exercise that I talk about in one of my other videos. It's making sure that you are using your intuitive mind to go further with it and not, you know, getting one piece of advice of, oh, I saw that he was sad intuitively, and then I'm just going to go forward and judge, you know, what that means and kind of what the story is after that. But instead you go back and you use your intuitive mind, you're neutral, and you just keep receiving more and more. And then maybe you see he's sad and he's lonely, and that's why maybe he did all these things. And I think this can happen a lot when you're asking your questions correctly, but then when you get the answer, you're just running with it with your intuitive mind too quickly, and you're not going back and asking more questions. And the bigger implication here is that if you start to get in a habit of always analyzing your intuitive hits with your analytical mind and not your psychic mind, you just start to get in a habit of filtering everything that you're getting and not really using your intuitive mind. And, you know, this kind of gets into psychics that really have a certain way of how they believe the world to work, and they are actually filtering what is able to come through because of their religious beliefs by saying, you know, I only believe in God and angels. You know, if there's any information that is outside of that, you're technically kind of blocking it off. You kind of have blinders on to anything else that doesn't fit within your perceived reality, if that makes sense. And I personally believe as a psychic, you should be able to read anybody of any religion and sort of pick up anything that they might believe in. You might not understand the context or the names of it, but I try to always be open-minded to whatever can come through and not judge how the universe works, because I don't know how that works. I just know what I receive and I pass it along. And just know that no one can ever really get rid of this filter. I mean, that's part of being human, and just know that if you're ever getting a reading from someone, you're probably getting some level of their filter. Obviously, we just want to try to reduce that as much as possible, but know that that's a thing that can definitely affect answers to questions. I'm curious which one of these you guys struggle with the most, or if there's other things that kind of hold you up on questions and asking them correctly. Let me know in the comments if you have further questions on this. I like to help you guys as much as I can with understanding your psychic ability and doing things in the best way possible. It's the Virgo in me. But if you're new here and you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe for more psychic tips and development exercises. I try to upload a new video every Friday or Saturday. And then at the moment, I'm currently doing live readings on Tuesday nights. I also have memberships again, so you can get exclusive member-only videos, member-only live streams. So if you're interested in that, definitely check that out. That is the blue join button on my page. Awesome, you guys. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in my next video. Bye.